International Development, conformément à l'article 108.
Pursuant to Section 108 of the regulations and the motion adopted by the committee on the 20th of October 2020, the committee is returning to its study on vulnerabilities that have been created and exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, to in particular the consequences of the pandemic on children who are living in states of crisis.
Encourage participants to please mute their microphones when not speaking and address all comments through the chair. When you have 30 seconds remaining in your questioning or speaking time, I will signal you with this yellow piece of paper. Interpretation services are available through the globe icon at the bottom of your screens. And I would now like to welcome our witnesses for the first panel. We have with us Jaya Murthy, who is the Global Chief of Internal Communication, and Pernille Ironside, Deputy Director, Division of Data Analytics, Planning and Monitoring of the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF. We have with us David Matas, Member of the Board of Directors, Beyond Borders, ICPAT Canada, and Shelley Whitman,
David.
Executive Director, Dallaire Institute for Children, Peace and Security. And Ms. Ironside, I understand that you will deliver the opening remarks for UNICEF. I will lead off with you by giving you the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the committee's invitation for my colleague Jaya Murthy and I to contribute to this critical and timely study, and for its focus on children in crisis and conflict. We are proud Canadians, and we've each spent the majority of the past 20 years as international civil servants of the United Nations Children's Fund, serving in conflict-affected countries including Iraq, Gaza, Yemen, Nigeria, Uganda, Somalia, and Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, where we've had the privilege of being part of efforts to support and protect children and their families. We've seen firsthand how the violent and protracted nature of today's armed conflict has torn families apart, the brutality inflicted on young minds and bodies, and their extreme vulnerability. One never forgets holding a trembling 6-year-old girl so brutally raped that she is rendered incontinent, or the frail body of a severely malnourished infant barely clinging to life, and the anguish of a child whose family was killed before their eyes. One also never forgets the rays of hope on their faces and the profound resilience when provided with access to services and the reassurance that they are being cared for. War shatters lives. It shatters countries' health and education systems. It damages or destroys vital infrastructure like water and sanitation, and it spurs the flight of essential workers such as doctors. COVID-19 has exacerbated this plight, triggering an unprecedented global health, humanitarian, socioeconomic, and human rights crisis, with significant interruption in basic services, including essential nutrition services, vaccine-preventable disease campaigns, and schooling for learners. With over 100 million COVID-19 cases and 2.1 million deaths in virtually every country and territory, this pandemic is the biggest challenge of our time and has had a unique disequalizing effect more than any other crisis on nations, states, communities, households, and individuals. It's clear that COVID-19 and all of its harmful consequences has made this a global child rights crisis. For UNICEF, the pandemic has fundamentally altered our responses, adding a new layer of complexity in some of the most difficult and dangerous operating environments. We now need to reach the same populations that are routinely missed with basic services in a context of restricted movement and lockdowns. We are redoubling our efforts with our multitude of partners, local and national authorities, humanitarian and development organizations, civil society, the private sector, local respondents, and thousands of community volunteers to support country readiness for COVID-19 vaccines, including strategies to reach all people, especially those in hard to reach locations.
Ms. Ironside, can I interject just on a very minor technical point, and this has to do with interpretation. If I could ask you just to lift your mic fractionally higher. There's a bit of a breath pop that occurs if it's too low that gives trouble to the interpreters. I think this will help greatly, and I've just stopped the clock, so back to you for the remainder of your remarks, please.
Thank you. It also is for us to enable schools to reopen safely, particularly in poor areas, and reimagine education systems with remote learning that will include children who previously did not have access to a TV, let alone the internet. To address the growing mental health challenges and risks of violence, exploitation, and abuse, to reduce discrimination and inequality that is particularly acute for girls and women, as well as people with disabilities. This is a crisis when we need the international community to come together from local to global to support an inclusive response through recovery that prioritizes investments in the world's children. Without increased investments in collaboration, recovery from the impact of this pandemic will be that much harder and slower. Esteemed committee members, 75 years ago, UNICEF was born out of the ashes of World War II, and once again, the world is engulfed in crisis, the consequences of which threaten to undermine every measure of progress as set out in the Global Sustainable Development Goals. This anniversary year, UNICEF is again being called upon to help the world's children, their families, and the systems upon which they rely on to emerge from crisis. And with crisis comes opportunity, a unique opportunity for Canadian leadership. As proud Canadians who have dedicated our lives to serving vulnerable conflict-affected children and their families around the world, there is nothing that we would like to see more and nothing that would make us more proud. So that young rape survivor I held in Eastern DRC and countless others whose lot in life has become that much harder due to COVID-19 can benefit from the integrated support she so needs and deserves to transform her outcomes in life. Thank you for this opportunity to address you.
Thank you so much for your opening remarks, Ms. Ironside. We will now turn to Mr. Matas, and the floor is yours for 5 minutes, please. Mr. Matas, you might be on mute. If you can just double check and just start over.
But okay, yeah. Sorry, I thought I was. You were going to unmute me. I apologize for that. Thank you for inviting me and for inviting us to participate in this study. Beyond Borders ECPAT Canada is the Canadian affiliate of ECPAT, headquartered in Bangkok, Thailand. ECPAT is the worldwide network of organizations working to end the sexual exploitation of children. ECPAT is an acronym for the phrase End Child Prostitution, Pornography, and Trafficking. Within the general topic of the study, we wish to address the vulnerabilities of children to sexual exploitation created and exacerbated by the COVID pandemic. In general, there has been both the vulnerabilities of children to sexual exploitation have been both created and exacerbated by the pandemic. Protective parents have died from COVID, rendering children vulnerable. Funds directed to protecting vulnerable children from sexual exploitation have been diverted to combating COVID. Programs combating child sexual exploitation have been impacted by the overall shutdown in reaction to COVID. School closures to protect against COVID have meant that child sexual abuse at home is not reported at school. Children in sexually abusive home situations have, because of the COVID-related shutdowns, been trapped in these situations. For those with access to the internet, the increased time children spend on the internet stuck at home because of COVID increases their vulnerability to sexual grooming and cyberbullying by child predators. Children in detention suffer from decreased monitoring by the International Committee for the Red Cross, decreased as a COVID prevention measure, leaving them open to increased abuse, including sexual abuse from detention staff. COVID prevention measures have impacted adversely on the delivery of humanitarian aid, generally including aid for the protection of children from sexual abuse. The shutdown of economies to protect against COVID have led to increased poverty, prompting some parents to sell their children into underage marriages or the sex trade. ECPAT in April 2020 posted a publication titled Why Children Are at Risk of Sexual Exploitation During COVID, and wrote, I'm quoting, when entertainment venues that traffickers frequently use to seek customers and exploit child victims are shut down, there's a likelihood that child trafficking patterns will adapt. Child marriages are likely to increase as teenagers from rural areas are highly affected by the worsening economic situation, being forced to migrate to urban areas and to live on the streets. The variety of problems that COVID presents, which create and exacerbate the vulnerability of children to sexual abuse, require a variety of solutions. Because of limited time, I only want to, in the remaining time, address one component, the increase in child marriages. Global Affairs already has a strong policy updated on its website in August 2020 against child early and forced marriages. The trouble with that policy is that in a Canadian context, it rings hollow in light of the widespread availability and practice of child marriages in Canada itself. The Constitution of Canada gives Parliament exclusive jurisdiction to regulate the legal capacity to enter into marriage. The provinces have exclusive competence over the formalities of marriage. Parliament, in the exercise of its powers over the legal capacity to enter into marriage, allows for child marriages. The Federal Civil Marriages Act allows for marriage of children aged 16 and 17, and the power has been widely used. A study of child marriages in Canada published in January of this year concluded, and I quote, demographic patterns of child marriage in Canada are similar to those observed in many low and middle income countries. Girls were far more likely to be married as children as than boys, and typically wed much older spouses. The study pointed to a discrepancy between Canada's domestic law and its foreign policy. The global COVID-related problems relating to child sexual abuse would be difficult for Canada to resolve on our own. Changing Canadian law to prevent child marriages is something entirely within the power of the Parliament of Canada. We should be doing this to prevent the sexual exploitation of children at home. By doing so, we would make our efforts to prevent the sexual exploitation of children through child marriages abroad more credible. Thank you very much.
Mr. Matas, thank you very much for your opening comments. And our final round of opening remarks will go to Ms. Whitman. Please, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much to the committee for this opportunity to speak with all of you today. My name is Dr. Shelley Whitman, and I am the Executive Director of the Dallaire Institute for Children, Peace and Security. I also wish to bring you greetings from our founder, Lieutenant General Retired Romeo Dallaire. It's a great opportunity for me to be here, and it's lovely to see some of my former friends and colleagues like Pernilla Ironside, and the last time we met was in Nigeria. I wish to begin by stating that the world needs to focus on building a global peace and security agenda that prioritizes the protection of children. Our collective failure to see the world through the eyes of children prevents us from effective and innovative approaches to address some of the world's most pressing issues of our time, and will be felt for generations that have yet to come. At the Dallaire Institute, we have been conducting work in places such as Juba, South Sudan, Kigali, Rwanda, DRC, Somalia, into Sierra Leone, Nigeria, and hopefully soon into other places such as Cameroon. Today, we are here to discuss the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on children who are exposed to armed conflict. Despite calls by the UN Secretary General, armed conflict has not stopped during the pandemic. Healthcare systems and educational services already under immense strain by conflict have been placed under even more stress due to COVID-19. Yet worryingly is the world's attention has been diverted from many of the conflicts that have continued or emerged. As a result, we are also not bearing close witness to the results of the concerns of children. The UN Special Representative of the Secretary General on Children in Armed Conflict has also expressed deep concern on the heightened risk of grave violations against children due to COVID-19. The UN Human Rights Report that they have issued states the response to the outbreak often had unintended and adverse impacts on children's fulfillment of their rights to education and health, as well as their access to justice, social services, and humanitarian aid. The pandemic has exacerbated children's vulnerability to such grave violations in situations of armed conflict. School closures made children even more vulnerable to other grave violations, in particular recruitment and youth, and children in camps for internally displaced people and those deprived of their liberty have been particularly exposed to
I'm on a parliamentary
further
hearing right now.
protection risks. It is
It'll
estimated
be over
that
in a couple hours.
99% of children globally reside in one of the 186 countries that have enacted some level of restrictions during the COVID-19 pandemic. And for children living in conflict and fragile environments, the pressures of COVID-19 are even more complex. I would like to remind this committee that UN Security Council Resolution 1612 highlights 6 grave violations against children in armed conflict. Those are the killing and maiming of children, the recruitment and use of children as soldiers, sexual violence against children, attacks against schools or hospitals, abduction of children, and the denial of humanitarian access for children. These 6 grave violations have been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. In particular, some examples that I would like to highlight for you is that when it comes to measures to combat COVID-19, many children have been confined to dangerous home settings, increasing their risk of exposure to violence, abuse, neglect, and exploitation, including sexual and gender-based violence, while limiting their access to protection services and social networks. UNICEF estimates that 1.8 billion children live in 104 countries where violence prevention and response services have been disrupted due to COVID-19. And the UN Population Fund estimates that the pandemic will result in an additional 13 million child marriages between 2020 and 2030. In addition, when it comes to recruitment and use of children as soldiers, we know that we have seen instances in places such as Colombia, where the armed groups are exploiting the global pandemic to recruit children into their ranks. Almost as many children are estimated to have joined armed groups in Colombia in the first half of this year, in 2020, as in the whole of 2019. In addition, we have also seen increased insecurity because of the present pandemic that have created conditions that have led to an increase in child trafficking in places such as Mali, and the cases of child recruitment has doubled there over the previous year. School closures and disruptions have also created immense impact on the 1.6 billion students in 190 countries. And the risk of military occupation of closed schools remains a real concern. Prior to the pandemic, education around the world was already in crisis, and it is estimated that over 10 million children will not return to school after the pandemic, as families continue to be impacted by growing poverty and unemployment rates. Currently, schools continue to be attacked in places such as Central African Republic, Cameroon, Nigeria, Yemen, and as recently as this week, we have seen horrific attacks on more schools in northeast Nigeria. The denial of humanitarian access for children in active conflict zones, pre-existing challenges with nutrition have been exacerbated during the pandemic, and border closures in response to the pandemic have also adversely impacted the delivery of humanitarian aid to populations in need of additional support. For those living in IDP camps, access to sanitation is also further limited, and this is happening in a context of record child displacement occurring in 2019. There is also increasing concern on children who are being detained due to suspicions of their involvement in terrorism or security offenses, and the deplorable conditions that many of those children continue to be held in. When we look at this issue, it is important for this committee and the Government of Canada to recognize that child protection is already a gravely underfunded field, constituting just 0.6% of overseas development aid. It is expected that the pandemic and the response will continue to reduce this funding. I want to remind those here that in November 2017, the Canadian government, in partnership with the Dallaire Institute, co-created the Vancouver Principles on Peacekeeping and the prevention of the recruitment and use of child soldiers around the world. Today, I would like to reiterate the need for Canada to continue to demonstrate leadership amongst the 100 endorsing nations that have endorsed since 2017, and also amongst the many who have yet to endorse. But
Ms. Whitman, I'm sorry, we're running a bit short of time. If I could just ask you to wrap it up in the next 30 seconds or so.
Sentence.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
It should not be forgotten in our global efforts to fight this pandemic as the achievement of a global children, peace and security agenda should be at the top of our list of priorities within the Government of Canada. Thank you.
And thank you so much for your opening remarks, and colleagues will get into the details with you in questions. We will now go into round one. These are 6-minute segments, and Mr. Diot will lead us off. Go ahead, sir, the floor is yours.
Ms. Whitman, that's really fascinating stuff, and it seems like such a terrible, terrible problem. And I know you probably got more to say about it, so I just wanted to give you an opportunity to maybe explain this situation. It seems to be very multifaceted. Schools closed. Are there sort of 2 or 3 enormously big problems that can be attacked so that we're not getting more children drawn into being child soldiers?
Great question. I think that definitely there are a few things that we could focus on. One, of course, is thinking through the detention issue. As I mentioned, I think that is a major issue for us to look at in terms of how countries are handling children who are detained as a result of their suspicion in armed violence or suspicions of being with terrorist groups. I think another area that is huge for us to focus on are aspects related to education. But again, I want to also stress that it's not just access to education, it's the quality of education. And one of the concerns that we have certainly is our ability to ensure that children have access to education that focuses on things such as critical thinking, peace education. And so thinking through those elements are really important. And I would say one last point that I would like to raise is as I was talking at the end about the Vancouver Principles, it's really important that Canada also steps up in terms of ensuring implementation of the Vancouver Principles is done. There is implementation guidance that accompanies the Vancouver Principles. While it's noble to have many endorsers, we have to see that nations, their security forces are also better prepared for interacting and helping to prevent the recruitment and use of children around the globe.
Are there any countries specifically in Africa where it's the major problem? It seems you talk about terrorism and so forth. Any ones that are having the biggest problems?
I think it's really hard for me to say this one is the biggest. However, I could certainly point to several countries, but it's not just an African problem. I want to be clear on that. This is a major issue in Latin America. This is a major issue in the Middle East. It's a major issue in Asia. So, many of the biggest conflicts you are witnessing right now and concerns, areas of concern, whether it be Myanmar, whether it's countries in the Middle East that Canada has worked in, whether it's countries like Ukraine. There are many, many areas where this is a major concern. And so I could list them off for you, but I think that it's important that for you to recognize that every time we have conflict, this is a major concern for us to look at.
Thank you. And this question is for the 2 officials from UNICEF. I know that UNICEF has called for developed countries to share vaccines through COVAX. And we know that our government has announced that they plan on also using COVAX for Canadian vaccinations after failing to properly get a Canadian supply from other sources. So I'm wondering how Canada's use of the COVAX vaccine meshes with the broader goal, as stated by UNICEF, of saving COVAX for the developing countries. Again, this is to the folks from UNICEF.
Sure, thanks very much for that question. You're absolutely right. Our main argument right now is advocating for vaccine equity and to ensure that all countries and all populations, especially vulnerable populations, have access to the vaccine as soon as possible, recognizing that we can't really address the pandemic if we're not taking an equitable approach around the world. In relation to Canada and COVAX, we're not in a specific position to comment on that, but we would certainly encourage the government of Canada to adopt an equity-focused strategy when it comes to providing vaccines around the world to families affected by COVID.
Thanks for that. A major focus over the last several years is ensuring that girls have access to education. And I've been to Africa and I've seen firsthand the great work Canadian and international organizations are doing to promote educational opportunities for girls in Africa. So I'm wondering how COVID has affected education specifically for girls, and anyone of you can answer. Anybody like to take a shot at that one first?
I would like to. Thank you for that question. I mean, girls, as you know, are already particularly vulnerable to being excluded from education systems for various reasons, but often driven by poverty and domestic kind of expectations and gender inequalities. And so now with COVID, that is being exacerbated even further, where girls are even more expected to perform domestic duties, caring for younger children, siblings, for example, and having fewer opportunities to access the existing education and being more vulnerable to both domestic and external exploitation and abuse as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Diot. There may be a chance to circle back in the second round. If we're all disciplined, we should be able to get at least partway into a second round. We will now go to Dr. Fry for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I just wanted to welcome David Mathers. He and I have crossed paths many times in the past, and I have a lot of respect for him. And I'm glad to see that he is, in fact, on ECPAT, because it hasn't been given a lot of priority by a lot of countries. Now, I just wanted to ask a couple of questions. The first one is, you were talking about the Vancouver Principles earlier on, and I wanted to ask, do you feel that the Vancouver Principles are being implemented as they should? And if not, what are barriers to implementing them? I saw that Professor Lawrence said that there were challenges in the implementation of the Principle 6. Which is lack of data. What are we doing about getting data about children in armed conflicts? And then I have two other people I want to direct questions to, so I would hope that I can get a succinct answer. Thank you, guys. Sorry about that. Who would take that? Would it be Ms.
So Dr. Fry, if I could to the question on the Vancouver Principles, and I'll certainly turn over to my colleagues from UNICEF if they'd like to answer on data. In terms of the Vancouver Principles, I think that one of the greatest challenges in terms of implementation is that there's been a lot of focus at Global Affairs Canada on endorsing the principles, but there has to be some resources and horsepower put behind implementation. Currently, groups such as ours, the Dallaire Institute, we have been working on implementation in the countries in which we have memorandums of understanding with, moving that forward. But that means that just as Canada has put money and effort into the ELSI initiative, so should Canada be doing that for implementation of the Vancouver Principles. And so that's my answer on that part.
Thank you. I wanted to ask a question quickly because I don't have a lot of time of David Mathers, and it's about ECPAT. In 1997, I went to the first World Conference on the commercial sexual exploitation of children and youth, and it was there that ECPAT started to form its legs. ECPAT is an NGO, as most of you know, but it is actually doing extremely important work on children who are being trafficked. Now, we talk about conflict areas, we talk about Africa, we talk about South America, we talk about all those places. No one wants to talk about what's going on in Europe. Children are being trafficked there daily by organized crime, and we don't have data on it. We don't know what happens to them. We can't find them. About 13,000 children right now are missing in Europe with regard to, nobody knows where they've disappeared to. And this is an informal kind of refugee camp, because these people come through Greece, they come through Italy, and then they get blocked at every border with the exception of Germany, in Europe. And everyone thinks Europe is wondrous because Europe is a rich country, but it isn't. There's a lot going on with regard to the safety of children in Europe. And I wanted to know how you feel ECPAT could do something about this. Is ECPAT involved in the European theater? Is ECPAT, what is ECPAT doing to flag commercial sexual exploitation of children? David, your microphone, please.
I'll see if I can. There we go. Yes, the ECPAT is a network of affiliated organizations, and there are country representatives of ECPAT in 102 countries. So the European countries, absolutely. And the headquarters has put out a general statement about the problems of COVID and sexual exploitation. And what you're talking about is a continuing problem, and it's pre-COVID, carries on with COVID. But what we see with COVID is, I mean, of course, what you're dealing with is sexual predators who are targeting children. And a lot of the venues where they traditionally have gone to target children, like bars and so on, have been shut down. And as a result, they're using new and different ways. They're adapting to the COVID situation. And often what we find is that children, because of the increased poverty and the shutdowns that are generated with COVID, become vulnerable in different ways. And as a result, the combat against child sexual exploitation in a COVID context has to shift. And in reality, there has been a degeneration. And of course, you're absolutely right. In terms of the European countries, it's not just people being refugees coming from outside Europe and then being exploited in Europe. It's actual Europeans being exploited within Europe. Hungary is a very big problem in terms of not only what's happening there, but exporting to the rest of Europe. I see my time is up.
I don't know if my time is up. Mr. Chair, have I got some space left quickly?
You've got about 20 seconds, Dr. Fry.
Oh, well, I'm just going to say, can somebody talk about the squalid conditions in the detention camps in Syria and what almost amounts to torture? A quick
just a brief answer, and we can always circle back in the form of asking witnesses to submit written testimony to us.
Nobody wants to talk about that?
If somebody wants to give a very brief answer on Syria, otherwise we'll have to go ahead and go to the next questioner. Okay, let's leave it there, Dr. Fry. Thank you very much. Monsieur Bergeron, la parole maintenant est à vous pour 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je remercie notre...
Thank you, Chair. I would like to thank our witnesses for being here with us today and thank them for their comments. This sheds a good deal of light on the work we're carrying out here in this committee. UNICEF has stated that at the height of the pandemic, 90% of students in the world were affected by school closures. We can see clearly, even in countries such as ours, the extent to which school closures have a serious impact on student motivation and, all said and done, on their scholarly success. In conditions far more difficult than ours, where technology may not be available, we can take it for granted that the situation will be even more worrisome and that some students might be tempted to simply go to work or allow themselves to be recruited for prostitution, by traffickers, or become child soldiers. We see, and UNICEF has indeed told us, that a world study that came out in August of last year, children are exposed to more violence, exploitation, and abuse since the beginning of the pandemic. So we've heard tell of the sexual trafficking of children. On the 12th of February last, there was an international day to counter the use of children in combat, and the government was asked to work hard to prevent the recruitment of children. Yet it seems that the number of children in armies is up by 75% over the last 10 years around the world. Can we take for granted that the pandemic has intensified this trend towards recruiting child soldiers?
Begin and then I could add in.
Thanks, Shelley. Happy to do so. And Mr. Bergeron, you're absolutely right. There is an intensification, but it's not only pandemic related. It's also due to the nature of warfare, the increase in complexity of warfare that's been happening, the increasing disparities and inequities in the world that are driving the most vulnerable children to seek whatever kind of avenues that they may have at this time. And I've personally met with many children who have actually felt that it's safer for them to join an armed group and where they can actually also have access to regular food, to shelter and so forth, rather than the dire circumstances that they have at home. So to the extent that COVID is exacerbating those circumstances and drivers, noting that that's not voluntary, that those are, a child is under duress under such circumstances. So it's very concerning for UNICEF that this is happening. And I'll hand over to Shelley, my colleague, who I'm sure will complement further.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. I think important to emphasize what Pernilla is saying. The situation will be exacerbated by this pandemic, but I think that it's important to recognize that a deep concern we have is that the foot will be taken off the gas in terms of the positive efforts because money and attention will get diverted to other areas. And so I think that's important for us to not lose sight of. The other thing that I would want to emphasize is there are a variety of reasons, as Pernilla mentioned, as to why children join armed groups. They can be forcibly abducted, but that's only one very small part of it. For many, yes, there's safety, a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning, access to power. And so all of these dynamics are very important for us to think about in terms of our responses to the pandemic, is to make sure that we are including this perspective of not losing sight of protecting children from exploitation, sexual exploitation, violence, abuse, etc.
If I may just add something about sexual exploitation in particular, which you also asked about. There's a double problem here. One is there's increased vulnerability, the increased poverty, which leads to increased willingness to sell children for money, and also many parents have been killed through COVID, and so decreased protection. And on the other hand, there's a weakening of the protective systems generally, because money's being diverted to other purposes because of COVID, and so we have this double-barrel problem.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Based on data obtained from the UN, 14 countries around the world, at least 14, would be using child soldiers. Ms. Fry referred earlier to the Vancouver Principles. There's also the protocol for children, keeping them out of armed conflicts. 17 countries have neither signed nor ratified this protocol. Others have signed it but haven't actually ratified it. Considering that 14 member states of the UN are using children in their own militia or armed forces, well, is there still any hope? Mr. Bergeron, I'm terribly sorry you've run through your time, but perhaps we could get back to the answer in the second round very briefly, perhaps. Yes, briefly, if it's possible.
The final 6th round.
Thank you, Mr. Bergeron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I do want to thank all of our witnesses today, and certainly that last message of hope is one that I think we all need to hear repeatedly, especially when we hear such horrific attacks on children. I have a few questions I'd like to ask. The first question I'll ask, I'll start with UNICEF, and then if others would like to add in, that would be great. You mentioned that the need for an integrated approach that breaks down silos in international aid and that prioritizes those facing intersecting vulnerabilities. How can Canada work to ensure that the most marginalized people on the ground receive the targeted support they need to get them through the pandemic in a way that responds to their immediate intersecting needs, but also aids in a more inclusive recovery?
Great, thank you very much for that question. It's a very, very important question. I think an integrated approach, or another way of putting it, is a holistic approach where there's responses provided to every aspect of a child's well-being, whether it's health, whether it's nutrition, whether it's education, whether it's protection, and even participation, affording them opportunities to participate in decisions that are affecting their lives. It's really, we can't take a siloed approach to children's well-being. As we've just heard, if a protection system erodes, then children are increasingly likely to get married, to be exploited, abused. If an education system erodes, like what we're seeing right now with so many children not having access to education, they're increasingly vulnerable. If there's not access to adequate health services, and we're seeing immunization campaigns in many, many countries in the world that are actually being stunted as a result of COVID, then that affects children's ability to study in a healthy manner. So the only way to address the full well-being of a child is to have a holistic approach where there's responses in each of those social service areas. So in terms of addressing vulnerable populations, we need to look at the locations in which those children are in each country, and then provide that holistic integrated approach in those specific communities.
Thank you so much. Ms. Whitman?
All right. Yeah, I just to echo what UNICEF has said, but I would also want to make it clear that I do think it's really important that when Canada is thinking of the areas and the countries and spaces and partners that you work with, that you look at the areas where children are the most vulnerable already because of armed conflict as being a priority area for us to focus on. Thanks.
Thanks. And then Mr. Mattis, if you had anything to add to that as well.
You were talking specifically about what's the most effective way to get aid or help for these people. I think the problem that we're seeing right now is a lot of services that were previously available are becoming underfunded because of COVID. And I think because of COVID, one thing that one can do is to compensate for this local diversion or withdrawal of funding by perhaps filling in the gaps so that these services can be maintained despite COVID.
Mm-hmm. Well, and one of the things, another question that I have is, you know, we speak about, and I think maybe Ms. Whitman, you spoke to this, the idea of children that were in conflict before the added burden of COVID-19 came upon us. You know, I have the interesting role of being on the International Human Rights Subcommittee as well as part of the Foreign Affairs Committee. And I know that we've been looking at situations in Cameroon and in Ethiopia recently, and what those impacts of those that those conflicts have had on children and how that has escalated during COVID-19. Now, Canada plays an important role both in terms of our international development dollars, our humanitarian dollars, but also our influence at a multilateral level. Perhaps start with you, Ms. Whitman. Do you feel that Canada could have more influence? Are we doing it enough? Are we using the tools that we have significantly and substantially enough?
I would like to really emphasize that those two cases, Ethiopia and Cameroon, are great examples of where Canada could be getting in earlier before we get to a full catastrophe on the ground. And actually, one of our pieces of work that we're working on is related to early warning and early warning of recruitment and how that's related to early warning of further mass atrocities and genocide prevention. And I would say that Canada can play a much stronger role. Actually, Cameroon has been looking to Canada to take a role, especially because of the dynamic of the Anglophone, Francophone similarities. And I know that could be a far stronger role we could be playing. And just my last point on that is that this is where peace processes and the role that Canada could play in bringing diverse players together and putting a priority on children's protection should be something we should be around the world advocating for.
And Mr. Mattis or Mr. Murthy, anything from your perspectives?
Well, what I would say generally about these issues relating to child sexual exploitation is when you're dealing with governments on the whole, universally, they're supportive. With some human rights issues, you get pushback from governments, but generally not on this type of issue. And I think we should be taking more advantage of the overall global willingness, at least at a level of principle, to deal with the problem and be more aggressive in putting forward our solutions.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much, Ms. McPherson. We have colleagues less than 10 minutes left with our scheduled panel before we go to our second panel. I'd like to propose that we do what we don't ordinarily do, but do under those circumstances, which is to give a member of each party an opportunity to ask one more follow-up question, a quick 2.5 minute to 3 minutes back and forth, so that everybody can ask at least one supplementary question. If the committee concurs, then I would propose that we go ahead with Mr. Diot, somewhere between 2.5 and 3 minutes, please, if you could.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I've noticed lately on social media, which maybe should be called anti-social media, but when people are talking about foreign aid and helping others, I don't know whether it's COVID has gotten everyone extra owly, but you often see these comments like, let's help our people first in Canada. And I've seen a lot of it lately. So this is an open question to whoever wants to jump in on this, but how do you convince cynical Canadians that there's a real investment here by helping people during this pandemic, especially children?
Of course, there's a connection between what happens abroad and what happens in Canada, and one can see that with our refugee population. I mean, the refugee population is not just abroad. A lot of it comes to Canada, and we have an interest in going to the root causes of problems which generate refugee outflows. So if we're just concerned about ourselves, we should be concerned about that.
Anyone else like to weigh in on that?
I would like to also. I think that it's important for people to see, yes, the direct linkages that globalization has on Canadian security, as well as the safety of our own children and the future of our own country and economics. We're all interlinked. We have to do a bit better job educating the Canadian public if they don't understand that. And all of you who sit in the seats of power have opportunities to change that voice also. And I would just like to lastly say that when we don't, we see the impacts of it through things like a global pandemic that will come back to our own country. So if we don't sort this out globally, then we will have repercussions domestically as well.
Anyone else have an opinion? Do we have enough time for one more?
We got about 45 seconds, Mr. Diod. Yes, if somebody else wants to come in with a supplementary thought, they're very welcome.
Yeah, no, I think it's been said very well, but the global pandemic has underscored the criticality of multilateralism and really working to support all countries. If one health system is weak, and if an outbreak is happening in that health system, then there's a risk of it spreading to many other countries around the world. We're seeing that with COVID-19. So that's exactly why we need to take an approach that is a global approach in nature.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Diod. Mr. Fonseca.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our guests and for your testimonies. I want to ask Mr. Mattes, in regards to COVID-19 in this pandemic, how's it affected the recruitment of children soldiers?
ECPAT is concerned with sexual exploitation, and when it comes to COVID-19, the impact of COVID-19 on recruitment of children for sex has been adverse. It's been adverse because there's been more desperation amongst the target population. It's become more vulnerable. It's also been adverse because the protective mechanisms have been underfunded or funding, and also some of them simply been shut down as COVID precautions, including a lot of the workers that are not sort of going out because of COVID precautions, so what we get is an increased problem and a weakened ability to respond to it.
Okay, and also to Mr. Mattes and Ms. Whitman, in what ways are children used as strategic and tactical innovation in conflict?
Yeah, I mean, they're used by many different armed groups, but as well as 7 state armed forces that continue to recruit and use children too. And so they're used in a multitude of ways. They can be used in support functions like porters, messengers, spies. They can be used for sexual services. They can be used as frontline combatants, human shields, those who may also be used as recruiters of other children. So there's many ways in which they are used, and it will depend on the place and the armed group and the tactics and approaches that they may be taking. But certainly one of the things that is very important is that those who are using children oftentimes very much understand that many of the peacekeeping forces and others who may be facing children see that as a moral dilemma.
And where is this most prevalent? Like, where do you see it? What countries? What areas?
So, as I said, I can name off the countries for you. We can certainly look at many of the nations that exist in conflict, whether it be South Sudan, Democratic Republic of Congo, Somalia, Nigeria is also there, Mali. We have from Iraq to Afghanistan, we've Myanmar, certainly Colombia.
Okay.
But
Everywhere.
So it really is a global dynamic for you to understand.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Mr. Fonseca. Merci beaucoup. Monsieur Bergeron, je vous passe la...
Thank you, Mr. Bergeron. Over to you for 3 minutes. Thank you so much, Chair. We know that this year, it's been said at the outset, UNICEF is at its 75th anniversary, and aid has never been a more urgent topic given the pandemic. Given that we try to work with the most people possible, we are very lucky to have the airlines chipping in to contribute by transporting vaccines. 10 companies, including Air France, KLM, and Ethiopian Airlines, have accepted to support UNICEF in this effort by carrying these doses. Air Canada, Air Transat, and WestJet are not among the companies, though. Could you tell us whether they have expressed any interest in this project, and what conclusions should we draw about their non-participation, should that be the case?
I can't speak to the Canadian airline companies specifically not joining, but what I can speak to is the efforts that are underway with all logistics, with the entire logistics industry to support in this effort in terms of supplying vaccines and also other critical equipment such as cold chain equipment to countries all around the world. So there's huge efforts that are underway in terms of striking innovative partnerships with companies who are providing in-kind contributions, whether it's storage facilities, whether it's boat transfers or airlines to contribute to the effort. And what we're seeing is as a few companies are coming on board, more and more companies are coming on board wanting to join the effort. So I know it's our supply division that is coordinating this effort for the distribution of supplies and equipment all around the world. And they're working with the entire logistics industry around that. So while there's currently agreements with 10 companies, I know they're exploring and having conversations with many, many others.
Ma question complémentaire.
My secondary question, I think I have a few seconds left for a complementary question. Supplementary question is as follows. In your logistics for this operation, this undertaking, is there still a need to have other transport or airline companies join in? And do you have any expectations of the Canadian ones?
I think absolutely there's a need. I mean, this is a historic effort. We've never seen a supply effort on this scale before. It's essentially all around the world. When we're providing supplies, often they're to humanitarian emergencies, such as many of the countries we've mentioned. But here we're in a situation where every country is affected, and we need to provide vaccines and equipment to every single country. So it's an effort that not one agency or not one company or not one actor can undertake. It's going to require a coalition of industries across countries to work together to be able to get the vaccines and the equipment to all of the populations in need.
Thank you so much. We'll have to leave it there. And to bring our discussion to a close this afternoon, Ms. McPherson, please, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, thank you to the witnesses. I'm just going to follow up on something that Ms. Whitmore said. She talked a little bit about the very big risk of dollars and attentions being diverted away from this very, very pressing crisis. And I have the benefit as the member from the fourth party to ask the last question of everyone. So I'd like to go through our three witnesses and just ask them in terms of a call for 1%. We know that many of the groups in Canada are calling for a 1% commitment to COVID response. Could you talk about what that would mean for your organizations, whether you would support it or anything else you would like to say as your last statement? And I'll start with UNICEF if I could.
Sure, thanks. I mean, we're in a situation where our humanitarian appeal has never been as large as it has been last year and also this year. So the biggest contribution that can be provided by all actors, all development partners, the government of Canada, but many other countries and foundations, it's really, really essential. So there's quite simply, we just cannot address the crisis the way it needs to be addressed unless we're getting the critical support from all actors that is required.
Thank you. Ms. Whitman?
I mean, of course, I would always emphasize that Canada can do more and emphasize the need for increased spending. For a long time, our country has not given the full percentage that it should have given. So it's challenging, I understand, because of the many things that we have to take care of at home. But we have a duty, really, as Canadians to help out globally. And maybe there needs to be some efforts by the Canadian government from a public-private partnership to increase that commitment.
Thank you. And Mr. Mattes, please.
Yes, well, what I would say is that even at the best of times, child sexual exploitation is difficult to mobilize public attention because obviously the children can't speak for themselves and the crime itself is not a visible crime. and where attention is diverted elsewhere because of COVID or because of poverty and so on, the problems, even though they're more acute, don't get the attention they deserve. And I guess my parting word would be not to forget these children.
Thank you. That's a wonderful parting word to end on, and I want to thank all of you for joining us. This has been a very, very compelling and interesting panel. Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. McPherson. And yes, colleagues, on our collective behalf, I'd like to thank our witnesses from UNICEF, from Beyond Borders ECPAT Canada, and the Dallaire Institute for Children, Peace and Security for their time this afternoon, for their expertise, but most importantly, for their service at the side of the most vulnerable around our planet. Thank you so much for being with us. That brings us to an end. And I would ask the clerk to suspend so that we can get our second panel sound checked and queued up. Thank you so much, everyone. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you as well.
Merci.
Thank you.
Merci. Au revoir.
witnesses in the second panel. Just to ensure an orderly meeting, if we could encourage everybody to mute their microphones, please, unless they're speaking, and to address comments through the chair. And when you've got 30 seconds left in your speaking or questioning time, I will signal you with this yellow piece of paper. So just keep your eye on the screen periodically, please. Interpretation is available through the globe icon at the bottom of your screens. J'aimerais maintenant souhaiter la bienvenue à nos témoins du deuxième panel.
I would like to welcome our witnesses, Faridi Dief, Director, Human Rights Watch Canada, Stephen Handfeld, who's a lawyer speaking as an individual, and Mathieu Paiement, producer as an individual, and Fiona Ni-Oiland, who's Special Reporter, Special Procedures Branch, UN Human Rights Office of the High Commissioner. Welcome again, Ms. Dief, to the committee. You will have 5 minutes for your opening comments.
Person and honourable members of Parliament for inviting me to address this committee. I will focus my remarks on the situation in northeast Syria for 3 reasons. The scale of the humanitarian needs compounded by this pandemic, the gravity of the human rights abuses experienced by children, and the opportunities for Canadian leadership to address these enormous challenges. Roughly 2 million people live in northeast Syria in areas under the control of the Kurdish-led autonomous administration, the de facto government. Much of the population does not have sufficient access to healthcare, water, sanitation, and shelter. And the region's healthcare system has been severely damaged or destroyed by nearly 10 years of conflict. While more than 60% of the population require humanitarian aid, in January 2020, the UN Security Council ended its authorization that allowed UN aid supplies to enter northeast Syria from Iraq, leaving aid groups that depend heavily on this critical border crossing unable to meet the population's needs. They are now dependent on the Syrian government's approval to deliver critical supplies. But Damascus continues to severely restrict aid reaching Kurdish-held areas and has repeatedly withheld vital food and medicine from political opponents and civilians. Medical supplies and personnel needed to prevent, contain, and treat COVID-19 are also restricted. As of January 9th, there were officially over 8,000 COVID cases in northeast Syria, but experts warn that actual numbers are significantly higher. The UN Security Council's failure to maintain a cross-border aid system also means there's no guaranteed channel for vaccine distribution in the future, with potentially catastrophic results. These appalling conditions also exist in the locked desert camps of El Hol and Roj that hold the family members of ISIS suspects who were displaced from territory previously held by the group. As elsewhere in northeast Syria, there are severe shortages of food, healthcare, and access to clean water in these camps, home to over 64,000 Syrian, Iraqi, and third country nationals, mostly women and children. The detained foreigners include at least 46 Canadians, 8 men, 13 women, and 25 children, most under the age of 6. In August 2020 alone, 8 children died in a whole camp, primarily from malnutrition and severe dehydration. They are among hundreds, many of them children, who have died of preventable diseases since March 2019. Rampant illness, unsanitary conditions that include overflowing latrines and insufficient water, and overcrowding have left detainees in the camps especially vulnerable to COVID. These detainees, including the Canadians, have not been charged with any crime and have never been brought before a judge. The innocent, such as the children who never chose to be born or live under ISIS, have no hope of leaving northeast Syria without this government's intervention. The arbitrary detention of these children solely on the basis of their families' suspected ties to ISIS amounts to guilt by association and collective punishment. Last June, Human Rights Watch published a report on the plight of these Canadians, and we've actively advocated for this government to repatriate them. But despite our efforts and the Kurdish authorities' calls to repatriate, Canada has only brought home a single orphan and has not even helped to verify the citizenship of the 20 or more children born in Syria to Canadian parents, leaving them without an officially recognized nationality. It is astounding that while Canada this week launched a global declaration against arbitrary detention, the government continues to turn a blind eye to the plight of its own nationals in northeast Syria, including children trapped in a war zone amid a deadly global pandemic. The government's inaction stands in stark contrast to both the rapid evacuations in response to COVID of tens of thousands of Canadians and the actions of Canadian allies who managed to bring home their nationals from these same camps. Describing her frustration with the government's response, one grandmother with 3 Canadian grandchildren detained in Northeast Syria asked Human Rights Watch, "Do they just want them to die? That's what it seems like. These children, where are they going to get food, medicine, vitamins? You're not helping them survive, and you're not letting me help them." Thus far, the government has offered only excuses to justify the Prime Minister's unwillingness to spend political capital to bring this specific group of Canadians home. In doing so, Canada is flouting its international obligations to intervene when citizens abroad face serious abuses, including risks to life, torture, and inhuman and degrading treatment. These breaches are especially egregious in the case of Canada's obligations towards child citizens, including the obligation to ensure a child's right to acquire a nationality. In closing, we ask this committee to urge the government to take several concrete steps. Canada should engage with like-minded countries to press the UN Security Council to immediately reauthorize the cross-border mechanism to Northeast Syria to enable aid to enter the region regularly. This government should also increase humanitarian aid to Northeast Syria with the goal of ending dire and often life-threatening conditions, ensuring adequate healthcare, shelter, clean water, sanitation, and education for children. And finally, Canada should repatriate as a matter of urgency all Canadians detained in Northeast Syria, giving priority to children, persons requiring medical assistance, and other particularly vulnerable detainees. Children should be brought home with mothers or other adult guardians, absent compelling evidence that separation is in the child's best interest. Canada should act now to recognize the citizenship of all Canadian detainees in Northeast Syria, including by issuing travel documents and coordinating safe passage to Canadian consulates and back to Canada. Thank you for your attention to this urgent matter.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dife, for your opening remarks. Maintenant, je passe la parole à Monsieur Handfield.
Now I recognize Mr. Handfield and Mr. Paiement, and you have the time to share between you, gentlemen. Thank you, Chair, and hello to all. The vulnerability we will be discussing today is that of Canadian children trapped in refugee camps in northeastern Syria. In a June 2020 report, Human Rights Watch counted 26 confirmed Canadian children detained in Al-Hol and Roj. Their only crime is that they were born to parents who allegedly belonged to the armed group Islamic State. In the context of a film on this deplorable situation, we sent a team of documentary filmmakers to Rojava, the Kurdish territory of Syria. In the Al-Hol camp, the largest in the region, they found that the responsible authorities do not have the financial or human resources that would allow them to maintain minimum health standards there. The camp is overcrowded. Residents are held in tents. They lack clean water. They eat just enough food to survive and have no access to basic medical care. This is in addition to the conflicts that erupt daily in this distressed micro-society. Detention conditions in the camps are unhealthy, inhumane. According to the Kurdish Red Crescent, 517 people, including 371 children, died in 2019, the year of our visit there, most of them as a result of illness. Under the circumstances, it is not surprising that the Kurdish authorities have been urging the various countries and issue to repatriate their nationals. The process is slow, and Canada is being inactive on this issue. Today, we would like to share how COVID-19 has exacerbated the vulnerability of Canadian children detained in these camps. Since the beginning of the fight against the virus, governments around the world have established much the same health guidelines: physical distancing, frequent hand washing, wearing masks, all in the hope of not overburdening Western health systems. Yet Al-Hol is perhaps the most utopian place in the world to try to implement these sorts of guidelines. How do you apply physical distancing in a crowded camp where 65,000 people are crammed into an area of no more than 1.5 square kilometers? How do you wash your hands without running water? How do you wear a mask when basic clothing isn't available? How can a health system not be overburdened when there are only 24 small medical clinics in the camp and only 5 of these still operational? Data is fragmentary, but one of the strongest data available on health workers in the camps shows that they were affected by COVID and that many of the health centers in Al-Hol have been closed because of this. The disease is spreading. Testing is not systematic. Kurdish authorities reported a total of 54 patients with COVID-19. At the same time, in just 1 week, 7 children under the age of 5 died in the camp. It's an emergency, and other countries recognize it. Over to my colleague. Thank you, Mr. Hanfield, and thank you for the invitation to speak here. Yes, it's an emergency, and other countries do recognize this. For example, in the United Kingdom, a motion has been signed by MPs from 4 parties to recognize that British nationals are being held in camps in northeastern Syria, that the camps are a, quote, particular breeding ground for COVID-19, unquote. And that one of the reasons for this is that the Islamic State doctrines propagate the idea that only infidels can get the virus, whereas we know that it is rather those who are already sick of other illnesses who are vulnerable. The inhabitants of the camps are numerous. They suffer from malnutrition. We saw that ourselves. We filmed it. There are war wounds, untreated diseases such as tuberculosis, jaundice, and gastrointestinal diseases. In the camp, the mortality rates was already hovering around 10%, and COVID is making it worse. Even outside the camps, the situation is frankly disastrous. As Farida was pointing out, because the war has destroyed the medical infrastructure in the region. In all of the Rojava region, only 2 out of 11 hospitals are still functional. There are 40 ventilators for a population of 5 million. And it is estimated that a maximum of 500 cases could be treated there. So to grasp how insufficient this is, consider that in the Iraqi Kurdistan, where tests aren't systematic either, there have been more than 100,000 cases and more than 3,000 deaths actually recorded. In this emergency context, Germany and Finland repatriated 23 children just before Christmas. At the beginning of 2021, France took 7 of its children for humanitarian and health reasons. All the children now held in these camps might have been repatriated if everyone did as much. A unanimous motion of the National Assembly of Quebec requested their repatriation. A petition was submitted in the House by Mr. Hanfield, and it was supported by all opposition parties and signed by more than 900 Canadians. Now, COVID is threatening the health and lives of its nationals, the nationals of Canada who have been forgotten in the camps of northeastern Syria, but the Canadian government is still doing nothing about it. Let us remember that Canada has repatriated or facilitated the return of close to 40,000 citizens or permanent residents from some 100 countries in the weeks following the first announcement of the pandemic, including 29 from Syria, so it seems more urgent than ever to repay the Canadian citizen children detained in inhumane conditions and threatened by the pandemic. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, gentlemen.
Airline, for 5 minutes of opening remarks, please.
Good afternoon, bonjour, Chairperson and honourable members of Parliament. Before I start my remarks, I will just state the waiver that I'm required to make as a UN official before you. My attendance today before the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development is in my capacity as Special Rapporteur on the promotion and protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms while countering terrorism. I'm here to provide an informal, unsworn oral briefing to the committee, and nothing in my remarks should be understood as a waiver, express or implied, of the privileges and immunities of the United Nations, its officials or experts on mission pursuant to the 1946 Convention. During my remarks, I will express my personal views and position on the effects of COVID-19 on children, in particular in the use of exceptional and emergency powers, and specifically, as well as that, on the obligations of states, including Canada, with respect to the arbitrary detention of children detained in Al-Hol and Raj camps. So let me say that I want to note that at the very beginning of the pandemic, the mandate I hold issued an early warning with a number of other special procedure colleagues on the misuse of exceptional powers, counterterrorism, security, and broader regulations in the context of COVID-19. We were particularly concerned that measures taken would fundamentally affect the rights of men, women, boys, and girls. I underscore that any measures taken to respond to the pandemic must be, under international law, necessary, proportionate, and non-discriminatory. given their potentially negative effects. In addition to that statement and that work, the mandate I hold and with two leading NGOs has created a global tracker on the use of exceptional powers around the globe in the context of COVID-19. And here we've been addressing and observing the scope and range of exceptional powers that are being used across the world. Now, we're all on our computers. We're all obviously dealing with the effects of the pandemic. But it remains clear that if we wake up the day after the pandemic and the rule of law and the protections that we have spent decades building for human rights and the rule of law have disintegrated, much more than health will have been lost during this really challenging period. I want to underscore that what we are seeing with negative effects on children in many places is that emergency powers and exceptional law have been used in many contexts to consolidate government power, to securitize government responses, and to undermine democratic process. Moreover, we're seeing expensive and expansive infringement on individual rights, including children's rights, that undermine society's challenge actually to affect the underlying conditions that are creating particular vulnerabilities to COVID. And more than that, I think we should all be aware that the changes implemented during the pandemic, like emergency and exceptional powers around the world, have the tendency to persist and become permanent. In particular, I want to highlight the widespread use of data tracking, including the most sensitive data, including in relation to children's biometric health data. In some contexts, without any protections or sufficient protections on storage, use, or transfer. I'm also particularly concerned that we're seeing extensive use of counterterrorism practice as the means of addressing the pandemic in multiple national contexts. What that does is, in fact, as other special procedures mandates have highlighted, is exacerbate discriminatory patterns of abuse by security services and agencies who primarily work in this arena, who have little or no experience or relevant experience of working in a health context. As we know, epidemiological evidence across a number of states reveals that COVID-19 is causing disproportionate deaths among racialized minorities and other historically vulnerable groups. Consider then the proposition that the tools of the surveillance state and the use of force capacity by states will be further mobilized against those communities who experience ongoing trust and harm deficits in relation to the security sector. Let me now turn to the issue, the complex humanitarian situation and the particular challenges of protection in the context of COVID-19 for the most vulnerable in Syria, specifically Northeast Syria. Last week, my office with 12 other mandate holders and 2 working groups of the United Nations Human Rights Council issued a communication to 57 states, including Canada, urging them to repatriate women and children from the squalid camps in Northeast Syria. We expressed serious concern at the deteriorating humanitarian and security situation in Al-Hol and Raj. I have set out with my fellow special rapporteurs the dire humanitarian conditions in the camp and the need for a collective action response to a collective problem. This is a list that no state should want to be on, and that in that regard, I include Canada. Thousands of people, including children, are exposed to violence, exploitation, abuse, and deprivation in conditions that, in our view, meet the standard of torture, inhuman, and degrading treatment under international law. Let me also be clear that unless individuals are returned, the need for victims of terrorism to have a clear accountability for the harms that they have experienced will not be met, as there is absolutely zero prospect of meaningful, fair trial in that part of the world. Let me close by saying, and I'm happy to take questions, that the communication issued to the government highlighted a data collection exercise that was undertaken on camp nationals, including Canadian women and children last year. We are deeply concerned about that exercise and the evidence or the information that may have been gathered and its sharing with security services. There is a solution, and we are seeing many states engage that solution by returning their nationals. Unfortunately, Canada is not one of those countries. And I urge the government and this parliamentary committee to focus its immediate attention on the need to ensure that Canada is a leader in this area, not a state who sits on a list of shame in the failure to return its women and children home. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Special Rapporteur Nia Lein. We will now go to round one, 6-minute rounds, and the person to lead us off will be Mr. Morantz, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just blown away by the testimony we've been hearing. It's certainly different than the line of communication we hear coming out of the mouths of government representatives. And I just want to start with you, Mrs. Deef. Ms. Deef, you talked about the government turning a blind eye. I know in Mr. Handfield and Payments written submission, they said that the Liberal government, that for over a year and a half, they have ignored obligations to Canadian citizens, including young children living in lethal and cruel conditions. But I think the comment that really hit me was when you said that the people dealing with these problems and suffering from these problems think that we just want them to die. Do I have that right? Is that what you said?
Yes.
That's very, very troubling, and I really do appreciate your testimony here today. We know that, as you mentioned, there are 25 children, Canadian children, trapped in Kurdish-run camps in northeast Syria. Can you elaborate a little bit on the conditions faced by these children, particularly in the context of the COVID crisis and the effect it's had?
Thank you for your question. Prior to COVID, the situation was dire and life-threatening in these camps. There is lack of access to clean water, to food. There's no education for the children. You know, the healthcare system is very sort of severely damaged. And this was all prior to COVID. You know, open latrines, unsanitary conditions, overcrowding. You know, tents that overheat in the summer. You know, collapse in the weight of snow and rain in the winter. And so these are abysmal conditions that the Canadians and others find themselves in El Hol and Rouge camp. And this was prior to COVID. And so now with COVID, we're talking about a situation where you have a healthcare system in Syria that has been, you know, eroded over the past 10 years of conflict, really no capacity to provide any kind of treatment for COVID, any type of medication. There's obviously the question and the issues around, you know, the aid corridor. But of course, you know, we're talking about 8,000, you know, official cases of COVID in the camps, but certainly the number is far greater, but there's no real testing capacity or capability to actually ascertain the number.
So just one other quick question for you. If you had to give the Canadian government a grade on how it was dealing with this problem, what would you give it?
I would give it a failing grade, and I'll tell you why. Because there is no sense of urgency on the part of this government to repatriate its nationals. There is no task force that's been established to address this issue. It's unclear whether the Prime Minister or the Foreign Minister receives regular updates on the health and well-being of these Canadians. And if you compare this consular case, including 25 children, to other consular cases, like the two Michaels, for example, in China, you'll see a huge discrepancy in terms of the response by this government. And so when I say it's a failing grade, really because there's been, you know, really no urgency, no effort to even create a direct line of communication with Canadian detainees. And in this case, you have the Kurdish authorities who want Canada and others to repatriate. They're not holding these, you know, officials, you know, outside of Canada's will. They want the Canadians to repatriate, but it's Canada that's failing to do so.
Thank you, Ms. Steve. Just given my limited time, I want to move on to Ms. Nia Lein. Ms. Nia Lein, I was trying to catch most of what you were saying. Some of it is I'm not completely familiar with, but I wonder if you could just elaborate on what legal obligations do countries like Canada have through the United Nations or through the tenets of international law that it may or may not be observing.
Right, thank you for that question. So we believe that legal obligation lies in a number of respects. The first is under the counterterrorism resolutions of the Security Council, those two resolutions that address foreign fighter obligations of states, where it is really clear that the only international law compliant response to the challenges posed by foreign fighters and their families or associated individuals is return. It's the only way that one will get prosecution, which is an obligation for serious crimes under international law if evidence exists to prosecute. It's the only way in which victims of terrorism will actually see a process which will meet their needs. And it's also from the long-term strategic and security perspective, which the mandate regularly engage with security services around the world. There's also a clear sense that this is in the long-term security interests of states like Canada, leaving these nationals in a place where they will fester, which create the ideal breeding grounds for further violence, is not in anyone's long-term interest. Under human rights law, I would just say under the treaty obligations in relation to torture, extrajudicial and arbitrary execution, there's a really clear and compelling positive obligation on Canada to prevent serious harm to its national, which it is in a position to prevent.
Thank you. Now my time is winding down, so same question to you. What grade would you give the Canadian government and how they're dealing with this situation?
Well, the mandate doesn't do failing grades, but let me be clear. The 57 states on this list are on a list of shame. This is a list no state wants to be on. This is a list that states should be actively seeking to get off. And this is a list where states have a human rights-led foreign policy. You shouldn't be on this list. You should be off this list.
Mr. Morantz, thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, just on a point of order.
Sure.
Ms. Olane's answer was cutting out on me. And I don't know if you had that experience as well, but I couldn't really hear everything she said.
I think I caught most of it, but we can have a restate for the benefit of members.
If that would be okay.
Sure.
So I said that special rapporteurs don't do grades, but this is a list no state wants to be on. This is a list that states should be actively seeking to get off. And this is a list where states who define themselves by having a human rights and gender-led foreign policy should be ashamed, frankly, to be on.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Morantz, thank you. The next 6-minute round goes to Madame Sahota, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's nice to see that the Conservative members on this committee are all of a sudden feeling sympathetic to this issue, because it's not what I've been hearing in the House for years now about those related to ISIS fighters that have been brought home and how they shouldn't be brought home. The amount of the sheer politics that's been played with this issue is just shocking to me. And now it's interesting to see that there's been a change of heart. I hope that change of heart lasts and we can work together on perhaps moving forward on this issue. But I am really interested in more explanation from Ms. Olane about, you had talked about the counterterrorism measures that are being taken in some countries, and they're basically taking advantage of this pandemic in order to take on those counterterrorism measures. Can you elaborate on that, give more specifics as to what countries you've identified engaging in this type of behavior and what exactly they've been doing?
So I think there are 3 buckets of action I would stress for this committee. The first is actually the rush to pass counterterrorism legislation during COVID, when parliaments are limited and unable to meet, when scrutiny, the kind of parliamentary scrutiny you need on that kind of legislation, doesn't happen. I will offer 2 examples. Both of them are our friends, but the mandate is both in France and the United Kingdom. We've seen extensive counterterrorism legislation in Peru and in Turkey. We would be happy to share the list of countries that have been passing such legislation. The second is a more challenging problem, which is the use of counterterrorism legislation to regulate COVID, meaning instead of using health provisions if needed or health law, we are using the security apparatus of the state to do COVID-19 work. I'm going to use the example of Sri Lanka in that regard, the use of the Prevention of Terrorism Act in Sri Lanka as one of deep concern. Again, we recognize measures will need to be taken, but counterterrorism measures are not fit for purpose for a health pandemic. And we ought to be clear about that. And what we see is opportunism, rife opportunism in expanding security measures in states that have highly problematic human rights records in the context of COVID.
I'd also like to know from the same witness as to what role you could play in your position when it comes to opening the passage to northern Syria. We've been hearing that the UN should be playing a role in this and promoting this. And so what is it in your role that you can probably do to help affect change so that people in that area can get the supplies and aid that they need?
So just to be clear, the resolution which has left one remaining open humanitarian path into Syria is up at the Security Council. That resolution will have to be renegotiated in the Security Council. And actors such as the human rights actors can only lobby for the emphasis and the need to keep that humanitarian passage open. But what we need is states like Canada standing up and speaking to their Security Council partners and saying, this matters to us. Humanitarian access into Syria is an issue for Canada. We want to put our political will behind that. And as you know, this is a very complex political issue. It involves Russia, it involves Syria, it involves a number of, and just bear in mind, we used to have 4 humanitarian access points. We're now down to the last one. And so if that goes, the consequent disaster that will be seen in Syria will be in many ways unmanageable. And so here we need a collective political will. We need the Security Council to understand that this issue matters for all states, particularly states who are committed to doing humanitarian action in Syria and ensuring the integrity and independence of that work. So this has to be an issue for the Canadian government. Special rapporteurs have much less capacity to influence than governments who make this a really key issue for themselves too.
Sure, absolutely. I think there's a large role for Canada to play when it comes to these humanitarian issues. In terms of the conversations that the countries have been having that are actually on the Security Council, what have you been hearing as a response to this issue?
Well, I would say that one of the difficulties is that this resolution on the Security Council, everyone is busy all the time. And a resolution that is a couple of months out often looks less urgent than the situation in Myanmar today or whatever else happens tomorrow. And my urgent message would be, don't wait until 5 minutes to midnight on that resolution, meaning this is not the key issue on the council right now, but this is going to be a very complex and challenging issue to negotiate. And states who have an interest in it need to start their work now and not wait until we're at 5 minutes to midnight. And what I am hearing is that mostly we're waiting for 5 minutes to midnight to hit before we start getting to work on the really difficult political negotiation and strategizing that will be needed to ensure that access point is kept open.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sarauta.
Your testimony. I appreciate your honesty as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Monsieur Bergeron, je vous passe la parole maintenant pour...
Mr. Bergeron, you now have 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. And once again, thank you to our witnesses for their very relevant testimony today. Sheds a good deal of light on our work here at the committee. Mr. Payment was saying that having Canadians held in the northwest Syrian camps is having an impact on their health and on their survival rates. Ms. Neolan is telling us that the effects may be even more serious than simply on their health, of a broader nature than merely on their health and their survival. According to Jeffrey Giliolantis, the assistant ambassador, interim ambassador for the United States at the UN Security Council, we should be bringing back nationals because the threat posed by the Islamic State will only grow if we don't. And I quote him, 70% of the children in the camps are under 12 years of age. We know that this is the case for most of the children left in Syria, and The Human Rights Watch Canada group is telling us that the Canadian government, Trudeau government, is not living up to expectations because it has left these children in northwest Syria. When we put the question to the prior Minister of Foreign Affairs, he told us that what's complicating matters is the lack of representation out there in the field. What's striking, though, is that a number of countries who are in exactly the same situation as Canada, meaning that they have no representation out in the field, have managed to bring back their nationals, their young nationals. So what have they figured out that we haven't figured out so far?
That question to me or to the other witnesses?
To anybody who wants to answer it.
I'm happy to start because the mandate has been deeply involved with many of these returns. I was in Kazakhstan last year when they repatriated over 500 women and children. I have seen it firsthand what states do in order to extract their nationals. So a couple of things to be clear about. One, when Canada and other countries say they have an absence of representation, that does not mean that they do not have the capacity to engage with these de facto authorities. And I want to be clear that we are aware that many third country nationals' governments are in de facto conversation with the de facto authorities, whether that is publicly acknowledged or not, as are their security services. The second is that the SDF has, as my colleague from Human Rights Watch has indicated, have indicated their absolute willingness to cooperate to ensure all of the things that need to be done, whether it's DNA testing, whether it's identifying the individuals, whether it's making the practical preparations for their departure. Third, there are countries prepared to help. The United States, for example, has been instrumental in many of the exits by, for example, enabling passageway and transport. So there's no deficit here in terms of means to extract your nationals. Countries are doing that. Kazakhstan did it last week, 7 nationals. The week before that, we had Finland extracting its nationals. This is not either impossible, it is more challenging under COVID, but it is not impossible. It is political will that is missing here, not the means to extract these individuals.
Monsieur Paiement, allez-y.
Si vous permettez.
Mr. Paiement, yes, with your permission, Chair, perhaps I could add. Yes, Mr. Hanfield, please. It's not only the governments that have access to the camps. The team that made the film Les Poussières de Daesh in 2019 had access to the camp. These was civil access. They had access to the women and children, Canadians who were in the camps. They also had access to Kurdish representatives who said that if the Canadian authorities wanted to bring back the Canadians in the camps, they would be glad to help. So why 2 years later, why hasn't the Liberal government sent out a delegation to get these children? If I may add something, we did delegate a team for the filming, and we even went back in 2020, and the Kurdish officials, given that it's one of their policies to work on helping for the repatriation of people who are in the camps, they were complaining that they had very little contact with any Canadian officials, whereas they do, actually. And we see that they do announce repatriations of nationals on a weekly basis, so they were complaining that they had no contact with Canadians, at least in the autonomous administration of northwest Syria. I see that the chair is telling us we have only 30 seconds left. We saw the federal government make a good deal about repatriating a single person. Mightn't they have repatriated more while they were at it? If I may. Yes, indeed. 25 children are at issue here. And they were waiting for proof that that child was an orphan. Indeed, they brought back the only orphan as though only that person merited being brought back because they had no parents to take care of them. But anyway, the situation is such that all the others should have been brought back at the same time. Thank you very much, Mr. Bergeron.
Round in this turn goes to Ms. McPherson, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank all of our presenters today. This is very disturbing testimony, of course. I'm a new parliamentarian, probably the newest on this call, the newest hearing this testimony, and I have no skin in the game. I have not been part of any administration that has been in government yet. But from what I'm understanding is it is vital that we take action. It is possible that there are people in that are eager to assist and to help with this action being taken, that other countries are doing it, and that fundamentally Canada is falling down on our obligations. So I guess, this could be the last opportunity I have to speak to you. I'd like to go through all three of the panels. I would like to hear, how are you able to move Canada on the one instance we were able to repatriate one of our citizens? What were the steps that worked with that? And how are you able to move other governments? What can we do right now to ensure that Canada recognizes its obligations and that this government actually acts on them? If I could start perhaps with Human Rights Watch.
Thank you so much for the question. I mean, the case of the 5-year-old orphan who was repatriated in October was sort of really a group effort. I mean, there was the special rapporteur who's with us today, and different mandate holders who have written about her case and called for the government to repatriate. Human Rights Watch released a report shaming Canada for not returning even one of its nationals from Northeast Syria and really being an outlier on this case. There were the advocacy of her family, a lawyer who represents her who was also put forward a case against the government. So it was really kind of a group effort. But unfortunately, what we heard following that repatriation, both from the Prime Minister and the Minister of Foreign Affairs, was that, that's it. We have no plan to repatriate any other national. The file is closed. And that was deeply disturbing to us to hear and disheartening. And so the hope now through, committee studies like this, through members of parliament who are willing to sort of take this case forward, is that we will see some action on the part of the government, certainly to repatriate the children, ensuring family unity, of course, without separating the children from their loved ones. And, it's a very difficult advocacy lift. It's not easy. Clearly, this is it's a complicated issue made even more complicated by COVID, but fundamentally, it's a failure of political will by this government and a failure of the government being sort of really unwilling to spend political capital to repatriate this specific group of Canadians because of their suspected ties to ISIS. And so we need to remove the stigma from this file and recognize that these are children that are in life-threatening conditions, trapped in a war zone amid a deadly pandemic. These are Canadian kids that need to be home.
Thank you very much. Perhaps I could ask Monsieur Handveld to intervene next.
Well, look, what can we do? Well, on our side, there are a number of things that we've been doing. We've been putting pressure, public pressure, on the powers that be. There's been an online petition launched, and it was submitted to the House. 900 Canadian citizens signed the petition requesting that without further delay, the Liberal government repatriate the Canadian children. The National Assembly of Quebec adopted a unanimous motion requesting of the government that it repatriate the children. This is not a matter of 1,000 youth we need to go get. It's just 25. In fact, actually, it seems there would be 24 of them. One young Canadian has been repatriated to the United Kingdom, actually, by them. So we've got a small number of children, and they're 6 years of age or younger. These are babies. I don't see why the government, Canada, which is a welcoming land, a land of pro-immigration and pro-human rights, respect of rights. We have the Canadian Charter of Human Rights, which has ascendancy here in the legal system of Canada, and the government isn't respecting its own charter by abandoning these Canadians overseas in inhumane conditions. If I may add to what Mr. Henfield has mentioned, I can say that given the context, it is our duty to work with Mr. Henfield on the legal aspect of all this, but also to produce content, something like what has been explained by Farida about how we got the first girl brought back. All this effort is humanitarian, and to ensure that it goes forward, we document the attempts of Canadian families, let's say, who have nieces over there in the Syrian camps, documenting their running up against the wall of the Canadian inaction right now. And that's the way that we're trying to put pressure here. We shouldn't need to do this in Canada.
Make the case for children. We see a process of unchilding, where a group of children are made unchild and put outside the category of protection of law. That's not just about these children. That's actually an assault on the Convention on the Rights of the Child. It's an assault on child's rights when you start to carve out one group of children who don't get the protection of all children. The second thing I would say is that you have to make a positive case, and that leadership has to come from the government. You have to talk about these children as children, bring their grandmothers into the conversation, show these families that there's a place to be a child-focused. There is a child-focused response to this.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nealon. We're finding ourselves in a precarious spot time-wise. We're now well inside of 10 minutes, and thank you, Ms. McPherson, by the way, for the final round. We're well inside of 10 minutes of our scheduled time, 1 hour with this group of witnesses. I suggest that we do what we did in the last panel, which is a very rapid set of 4 questions, 1 from each party, no more than 2 minutes, question and answer. If there is a follow-up issue, if not, in the interest of time, feel free to pass it to the next colleague. We do have some other business to attend to afterwards. Ms. Gladue, 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses. So I'm outraged to hear that the government repatriated 1 child and left 24 behind. I think that's outrageous. But am I understanding, this question is for Human Rights Watch, that currently with the border that is open and the mechanisms and the other people that are in place, that if the government had the political will, they would be able to get those other 24 children home?
Yes, they very much would have. And as some colleagues said earlier, several governments repatriated in December and then again in January. And so it is possible. And there are, whether it's the US government and the Kurdish authorities or others are willing to facilitate that activity. We've seen as well that, Canadian consular officials have actually had engagement. The Canadian ambassador in Erbil in Iraq has had engagement with the Syrian authorities. There's been also, certainly when the repatriation happened of the 5-year-old orphan, there could have been efforts made to repatriate the others, but unfortunately, we haven't even heard that that the government even checked on the well-being of the others, Canadian detainees, while they were there repatriating the 5-year-old orphan, because they really have no intention of moving forward on this file.
Thank you, Chair. That's my only question.
Ms. Gladue, thank you very much. Dr. Fry. Dr. Fry, I think you're on mute.
I wanted to ask you a question. I'm sorry, I didn't realize I had a turn, Chair. I just wanted to ask a question about this repatriation process. We're talking about concern, Chair, by the government with regard to children who may have been incorporated into and within ISIS. And I think this cannot be just taken as lack of political will. There have been a lot of concerns by the former government about repatriating people who had ties to ISIS. And we see that this is a question that is constantly asked by other governments, especially the opposition parties. So how do we square that? And how do we know that when we bring those children back, that there will be an ability to ensure that we're going to have all of us working in the same direction as a parliament to say this is a thing to do and not play political games with it, because I think political games are what we are at. I agree with you that these children should come back. But then again, if we all agree that that should happen, there should be a way of ensuring that when these kids come back, that they get incorporated into our society and that they don't have that stigma of wandering around with people calling them terrorists or et cetera. And I've seen that happen in our country in recent years. So can somebody tell me how we do that without that happening? It's not simply no one wants to bring the kids back. It's how do you do it without having the kids stigmatized when they get back by various other political parties?
Can I briefly say, Canada has one of the most experienced and sophisticated childcare systems in the world. You have the best resources and the greatest expertise to deal with this problem. You have many children who are in need of both support and different kinds of, and families who need support. What we need here is a reintegration program. There are lots of countries doing it and doing it well. There isn't a deficit of examples out there. And Canada is exactly the best placed country to show how this can be done. And that both augments Canada's leadership role, also makes the case for security, for how you manage to ensure and show others how reintegration and rehabilitation can be done using all of the resources that are available in your childcare, health, and education systems. And I believe that to be entirely within the grasp of Canada.
I agree. I agree that we know how to do it, but I'm suggesting that we had one young man who came back who had been pilloried for many, many years and had to go to court to be able to be seen as a valid Canadian. And we saw what happened there. And I think we are concerned for the children when they get back, that there are no political games played with these children.
Dr. Fry, thank you very much. Monsieur Bergeron, pour 2 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Bergeron, you have 2 minutes. Mr. Chair, what I find fascinating in this discussion, well, it's as though Canada is the only country dealing with this type of challenge. Many other countries, including some that are industrialized nations, have succeeded not only in this matter, throwing light on the very issue of citizenship, but also in bringing back these young people. So I can't see why other countries have managed this, facing the same type of constraints as Canada is. They've brought back their nationals, yet Canada maintains that it can't, even though it has managed to repatriate one child. Given that Canada has been able to bring back one child national, and based on Mr. Paimon's comment, the only reason for which this national would have been brought back is because she is an orphan, well, perhaps the government of Canada, contrary to other governments, is afraid of having to bring back the parents of these children. And perhaps the fear is that by bringing back the parents, the government would be bringing back potential terrorists. But isn't this the sort of thing that our security services could look into in greater depth?
Thank you for the question. I mean, I think the real, obstacle here is that the government is not keen to repatriate the adults. And by repatriating an orphan, it doesn't have to repatriate any adults with them. And the fear, of course, is a political backlash from, members of various parties in Canada to repatriating any adult members with suspected ISIS ties. But clearly, Canada has a robust judicial system that's able to, prosecute individuals who may have committed crimes here in Canada. As the Special Rapporteur said, there's clearly no meaningful way to do this in Northeast Syria presently. And so what we're calling for is, all of the Canadians to be repatriated, not just the children, and certainly the children not to be separated from their parents or guardian unless that's in the best interest of the child. And for all of those people to be repatriated to Canada, reintegrated, rehabilitated, and anyone who may have committed crimes would be prosecuted. And that's really kind of what we're looking for. The reason that other countries have done this and not Canada is simply because there's political will to do so.
Thank you very much. And the final round to Ms. McPherson, please, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you again to all our witnesses. This testimony just gets worse and worse, frankly. I just have one very short question. I recognize we've kept you all far too long. and we are out of time. Miss Nyelen, I'm sure I've pronounced that incorrectly. The statement, the letter that you sent, the 57 countries that are on your list, I'm assuming that that letter was sent to the Government of Canada. Have you received a response? And if so, what was that?
So we haven't received a response. The government has 60 days to respond to the letter. The list of the countries is public and the press statement is also public. So I really would say to Canada, you have 60 days. Use those days well. Use them to action, to figure out what you can do in this circumstance. As we've clearly outlaid, there are a number of instant measures, including checking on the status, the health, and the situation of those in the camp, verifying nationality. We've seen how these things can be done, including COVID. So this 60 days is really a test case for the government. What can you do in 60 days to respond to the Human Rights Council's special procedures mechanism and the attendant attention that being on a list of 57 countries, which demonstrates the collective action problem that has to be addressed? Use those 60 days wisely. Show us that you can actually respond meaningfully to address your international and human rights obligations in terms of women and children in the camp.
Thank you. And I assume that that letter could be submitted to the committee following when the response, after that 60 days, it would certainly be worthwhile for this committee to be able to see a copy of that letter.
We can make that available when it's public after 60 days.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. McPherson. And on our collective behalf, I'd like to thank our witnesses of the second panel for their expertise, for their time today, and for their service. We will give you a moment to disembark with our thanks, and we will suspend so that we can continue with a piece of business afterwards. Thank you, colleagues. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup.
The floor to bring a motion. Ms. McPherson, you have the floor.
Sorry, Chair, and I was focusing on that last panel, and so I'm just bringing up the motion now so that I can actually read it out so that we have it for us. Okay, so the motion that I would like to bring forward and that I would like to table is that the committee recognize that due to failures by the government to ensure adequate supply of vaccines for Canadians through national manufacturing and international procurement, and that Canada is the only G7 country accessing vaccines through COVAX, an initiative intended to provide vaccines to high-risk individuals in low and middle-income countries. The committee further recognized that this failure by the government to secure domestic supply makes Canadians more vulnerable to dangerous variants and extends the detrimental global economic impacts of COVID-19 by delaying vaccinations to high-risk people in poor countries. Finally, that the committee report this motion to the House. And I bring this motion forward, Mr. Chair, because I'm deeply concerned about the fact that Canada is the only G7 country who has access to the COVAX vaccination. We know, regardless of the rule of law, that this vaccination program, this program of COVAX that was put in place in 2020 was put in place to help low and middle income countries, of which Canada is not one. And because we are taking those vaccinations away from other countries, or potentially taking those vaccinations away from other countries, there are important things that could result. One of them is that we could have up to 30% higher morbidity around the world. 30% more people could die because we do not have an equitable way to share our vaccines. The second thing is Canadians are at risk. If variants are developed because we aren't able to address the needs of the most vulnerable around the world, variants will develop that we may not be able to be protected from by the vaccines we've already received. And finally, we live in a global economy, and Canada's economy cannot recover while our global economy is being hampered by COVID-19. It is bad public health practice. It is extremely unethical, and it is also very, very bad for our global economy. So this is why I would table this motion for your consideration.
Thank you very much, Ms. McPherson. And just for housekeeping reasons, if we can use the virtual raise your hand feature on Zoom as we do in the past. Also, I'd like to encourage colleagues, once they've spoken, to lower their hands. If they'd like to get back into the cycle, they can re-raise them, but it'll give me some clarity in terms of who's already spoken. And Madam Clerk, if you could assist, as you have in past sessions, with the colleague who's with us in person in Ottawa tonight, that would be extremely helpful. I have in sequence at the moment Ms. Sahota and Mr. Morantz.
Thank you. Sorry, couldn't find my mute. No, although I just wanted to say that although I understand the sentiments of Ms. McPherson on this, I do think that I have some remarks to add to some of the language of the motion. And I think some of the language puts undue or unfair criticism on only this government. It says that due to failures by the government to ensure adequate supplies of vaccines. I don't think that the situation the government is finding itself in right now is due to a failure of the government to secure supplies. There are many, we have secured 5 times the amount of our population in supplies. There has been a decrease in production due to that, or a temporary delay in production, and due to that, we find ourselves in this situation. I think it's a global circumstance right now, not necessarily one that's only impacting Canada, but many countries in the world right now. And I don't believe if any other party was in government right now, the situation would be all that different. I think we've all had discussions about the fact that, we wish that there was domestic capacity right now to manufacture vaccines, but we have done our level best to try to create that capacity once again, and that's well underway. And that's not due to the part of this government. I mean, that is many consecutive governments, and it was under a conservative government in which we lost our capacity to begin with. But I mean, I won't say that I would go all the way back just to blame that conservative government or anything either, but it's no one government, right? This is just the situation we find ourselves in. And Canadians expect us to take responsible measures in order to make sure that Canada and the world can face this pandemic together. Back in the fall, we invested quite a lot into 3 different facilities in Canada. $173 million through the Strategic Innovation Fund was invested into Medicago to support Canada's response to COVID-19 and future preparedness. We're seeing the results of those investments right now. We invested $18.2 million in a Vancouver-based biotechnology company, Precision Nanosystems. And we also invested $24.27 million in a project to help advance the development of a COVID-19 vaccine candidate through preclinical studies as well. And this is in addition to the $220 million that we have become leaders in investing into COVAX. And we did that so that there would be a global supply. We've invested far more, of course, to make sure that those low to middle income countries that McPherson has mentioned do have supply. In fact, even in the agreements or even in the statement, when you take a look, and I think we had this discussion in one of our meetings previously as well, that the intention was always there that Canada would have first access to these medications or to these vaccines. And it is stated that a core objective of WHO Global Allocation Framework is to promote fair and equitable access to all. And in the first phase of vaccine availability, that the vaccines will be offered to all participating economies at the same rate to allow them to vaccinate the same percentage of their population. So this was stipulated in the agreement to begin with. And Canada, yes, I understand that, you're pointing to the G7 factor, but Canada is not alone in developed countries that are also going down this path. And New Zealand has responded. I think around the world, we're hearing that New Zealand's response to this pandemic has been exceptional. And I wouldn't argue that, but New Zealand is also relying on the COVAX vaccine supply. So is South Korea, so is Singapore, so is Indonesia. So I just feel that there is, some of the language could be amended. And I would, my first comment would be that we remove the word failure and we put in due to global circumstances, that the government, that the committee recognized that due to global circumstances, the government has had delays in the supply of vaccines for Canadians. I think that would be more appropriate. And also, I think that my second point is that we have a lot of important work that is happening in the House itself right now, and a lot of important legislation that is equally important to serving Canadians and this pandemic. And so I think that in the end of this, although there are some other comments I'd like to make too, but I don't want to, I don't want to reword the whole thing by any means, but I do think in the last sentence where it says finally that the committee report this motion to the House, I would request that that be removed from the motion as well, and that we deal with this issue at committee. And there's other ways that perhaps we can have that discussion here and look into investigating why we're having to use COVAX, or perhaps I'll just throw out there, maybe invite the minister on this issue to talk about it, and in a public hearing, of course, where we can, ask the important questions as to why this decision has been made by the government. But I don't think it's in any Canadian's interest that we take up valuable House resources, and reporting this back to the House could possibly take up a whole day where we could be debating something else. At the minimum, it would take up at least 4 hours of House time. And I think there's legislation that I know that the NDP is looking forward to debating on and seeing passed in the House as well. So those would be my two big points, that that this circumstance is one that, yes, we do find ourselves in, but it's not due to any fault of one particular government. And then second, that we remove the reporting to the House. So those are my comments for now. Thank you.
Ms. Sahota, thank you. Thank you very much. Are you formally moving those as amendments?
Yes.
Okay. If I could just ask you if you could forward the language of your amendment to I believe it's sentence 1, the very first passage that you referred to the clerk, just so she has that in front of her.
I don't have formal language drafted, but I think it's just 2 changes, really. It's striking out the final sentence and replacing some words in the first sentence so that it states that the committee recognizes that due to global circumstances, the government has faced delays in supply of vaccines for Canadians through national manufacturing, and the rest of it can be the same. So if that's okay, was the clerk or the analyst able to follow? Yep.
I'm getting a thumbs up. Thank you, Ms. Sahota. And procedurally, Madam Clerk, we're now on a discussion on the amendment, but I see a number of colleagues who have raised their hands previously. I would think that they could probably redirect their comments to address the amendment that you've put forward. I have in sequence Mr. Morantz, Dr. Fry, Ms. Gladue, Monsieur Bergeron, and Ms. McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to say quickly that I believe I speak for myself and my Conservative colleagues on the committee that we support this motion in its present form. In any event, I'll wait to hear how the amendments actually look, and look forward to Ms. McPherson's response as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morantz. Dr. Fry.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to speak because we are now speaking to Ms. Sahota's amendments, and so I will stick to Ms. Soto's amendments. However, I think in my instance, the whole motion is a misinterpretation of things that I would have liked to have discussed, but I'll discuss that when we're discussing the amended motion. But now to the amendments. I think that what I know that the issue of vaccines is this. Normally, a vaccine takes over 10 to 24 years to develop. That when it is developed, it goes through the in vitro trials, and it goes into clinical trials, and it takes a heck of a long time to get accepted by countries to be used. I mean, we saw how long it took, for instance, when Salk brought in the polio vaccine. This is an extraordinary feat for vaccines to be available and having to undergo clinical trials in only 6 months. And so one of the things that also created was this need for everybody to jump on it and to say, oh my gosh, yeah, let's all agree with these vaccines, let's all get moving on them, only to find that global demand did not allow the vaccine manufacturers and producers to be able to produce the amount of vaccines to meet global demands, and had to pause and stop and actually decided they were going to have to expand their facilities and their capability to be able to churn out the number of billions of vaccines that they needed to do. Now, that is not any one government's fault. That is actually a reality. That's a fact. This is the truth. They can't do it now. We're seeing that everybody's moving forward and working quickly. I think that, you know, that global circumstances should talk instead of not one government's fault, but about the fact that, in fact, global circumstances and global capacity from vaccines have led to this issue. We now also see that it is not a government's fault that some countries are not using these vaccines because they do not act against the variants that we see coming up. Even South Africa is turning down use of certain vaccines because it does not actually is not able to prevent against variants. And again, clinical trials do not happen in 2 days. You don't suddenly find out how people react to something and what the downsides of it are. This is medicine. This is about people's needs and the ability to be effective and to be safe. Those are two important things in vaccines. So this is a real thing. We have a pandemic. This is not about Canada being the only country that doesn't have supply. And so I wanted to speak to that. I want to also speak to the second part of the amendment, which is that the committee report this motion to the House. If we are going to begin on standing committees to report every single motion that should be debated by the committee and agreed on or disagreed on by the committee to the House, we will begin a procedure, a set of procedures that will not allow Parliament to even be able to function. So I think we have to ask ourselves, why are we wanting to do this? The second part of, unless it's just something that we feel would score political points or be partisan. I also wanted to remind everyone of one thing. Canadians and people around the world are scared. We have seen a first wave. We have seen a second wave. We are now talking about a third wave. People are frightened. And if we feel that it is responsible of us to increase that anxiety and that fear amongst our own citizens by discussing where governments have risen and governments have fallen and governments have failed without actually speaking to the facts of the issue, we are actually doing a disservice to Canadians. I think it's mischievous, but I don't believe it's meant to be mischievous. I think it's in all good faith that this is brought up. But let us remember that we need to look at reality. We need to look at facts. We need to look at this is more than just a government. And we need to assure Canadians that we, all of us, every single political party in the House of Commons, have their backs and are prepared to do whatever we need to do to be able, within practical circumstances, to deliver for them in the way that we do. Now, later on, Mr. Chair, if we're coming back to the actual motion, I would like to speak to certain elements of the motion that I also think are not based in fact. Thank you.
Dr. Fry, thank you very much. Next in sequence, I have Ms. Gladue, Monsieur Bergeron, Ms. McPherson, and Mr. Saini.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to talk a little bit about the facts, because I do think that if you look at the facts, the government did not have a plan on vaccines until the Conservatives started calling for one. And then there was a scramble to get enough vaccines for a photo shoot. But consistently, we've seen that we need to get 2 million a week, and we've been batting zero nearly all month. The domestic production that other places like the UK put plans in place to establish, that wasn't done as well until the opposition started calling for it. So I do think the government has failed in terms of their not having a plan and not being able to execute the plan, and people will die. Thousands of Canadians will die as a result of that. And so I don't mind the language on failure. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gladue. Monsieur Bergeron.
Alors, Monsieur le Président, d'entrée de jeu.
Mr. Chair, I would like to, from the very outset, point out that we do have another committee at 6:30, and I will need to move to another building to get to it. So I'd like this to be taken into account. And when we decide to have an extra meeting at the last minute in this time slot, well, sometimes, of course, it's a very important one, of great importance to allow us to address logistical issues. But about the amendment and the motion itself, while I'm at it, somewhat like Ms. Gladue, I'm not really that worried about how we're going to put the matter, but it does seem important that we say something. Why important to say something and to speak up? Well, not to create panic, as Ms. Fry is, rightfully concerned that we might, but simply to recognize that perhaps we might have done better. Not to blame anyone, because in any case, it's of no use to cry over spilt milk because it's not going to change anything for Canadians. It's not going to change anything, given that for a number of weeks now we haven't had the vaccinations that we should have been getting and that people are getting infected, variants are spreading, people are dying. Chair, people are dying. That's of concern to me. While the companies are arguing, the pharmaceuticals are managing this, that, and the other issue of theirs, and governments are arguing with them, well, people are dying. People in our ridings are dying, and this is something I can't stand for. So I would like to be able to recognize this openly, one way or the other, not to blame anyone, not to say that, oh, my dad's better than you, and I can spit further than you can. That's not my aim at all. I just want to be able to stand up and say we could have done better. It's not just a matter of fact. Dr. Fry says it's a matter of fact. It's not just a matter of fact. If it were simply a matter of fact, then the government would openly discuss and tell us about the negotiations underway with the pharmaceutical companies, but they're not doing that. All they've told us is that there is this enormous dose of vaccinations that we would get eventually after some long process that's not being discussed. Now, we have gone from, being in the head of the runners at the beginning to being way down when it comes to our performance in vaccination, how many of our Canadians we vaccinated. So what's gone on? We were doing so well in December, and now we're among the worst performers, and that's of great concern. When you see that a state such as Israel, with 6-7 million inhabitants, such as Quebec's, has been very good at vaccinating, way over simply the vulnerable and the healthcare workers. Well, what have they got that we haven't got? What have they done that we haven't done? And what have we done to wind up where we are? So my aim isn't to blame anyone. I would simply like it to be well recognized and said openly that something hasn't gone right. When you're out begging for vaccinations from India and from COVAX, well, something's gone wrong. Meanwhile, as I have said, people are being infected, variants are spreading, and people are dying. True. The health of our fellow Canadians is of great concern to us. Yes, we take that for granted. So we can't say, oh, well, that's just the way it is. It's kind of this thing called a global situation. It's not the case in other industrialized countries. Canada has lost ground Canada's performance has been slowed. I can remember the Prime Minister blaming premiers of the provinces for not vaccinating fast enough. And now the provinces are ready. All they're waiting for is the vaccinations. So why aren't they there? What happened? Where's the supply? How did we come to this? So please, please, let's find a wording, any wording, but a wording that will allow us to carry a motion that says something about this fact. Thank you, sir.
Fonseca and Dr. Fry, and I just want to draw colleagues' attention to the fact, as raised by Monsieur Bergeron, that other members have other engagements. We had initially foreseen a period until 6 o'clock to discuss this, but I wanted to get a full airing of views, and I have the sense that there is further need for discussion, particularly in light of the fact that we have an amendment. But let's hear from the three colleagues that have got their hands up now. Ms. McPherson, Mr. Fonseca, Dr. Fry, please.
So to start with, I just want to say this was not done. This motion was not brought forward because I was wearing a partisan hat. This motion was brought forward because I was not wearing a partisan hat. I was wearing my international development human rights hat, and I am so appalled by what's happening around the world with regards to this. Now, I'm more than happy to get this moving forward, to get this passed. I'm more than happy to accept the wording of the first sentence that due to global circumstances, the government has been unable to ensure adequate supply of vaccinations for Canadians. More than happy for that. That said, I am not willing to accept that the committee not report this to the House. This is an issue that is not just a foreign affairs issue. This is an issue that affects Canada's response, and we need to talk about it. That is the government and the opposition's job. So I would actually like to put this to the vote. I mean, we can talk in circles for another 3 hours. Goodness knows this committee has the capacity to do that. I would think that at this point we have compromised. We have changed the wording of the first sentence to make it clear that this is not something that was just done by this government, but by 10 administrations, 6 prime ministers. But can we just accept this motion, and then Mr. Bergeron can get to his meeting, and we can have this important, vital debate about vaccine procurement and vaccine manufacturing and international vaccines in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Ms. McPherson. Mr. Fonseca.
Mr. Chair, listen, you know what? We've had a great discussion here. I think more needs to be done. I think I move to adjourn this meeting at this time. It's past 6.
Point of order. I already asked for the vote to be put. So you didn't respond to that, Mr. Chair. You'll have to respond to that before you can respond to the other members.
Thank you very much for the point of order, Ms. McPherson. One second. Let me just ask the clerk for advice on whether you can move to adjourn or move to call the vote, and which of these two statements by either yourself, Ms. McPherson, or Mr. Fonseca is in order.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A move for the previous question, so to put the vote in committee is not admissible, as per page 1068 of House of Commons Procedure and Practice. The motion to adjourn debate is admissible. And
Madam Clerk, is it dilatory?
Yes, Mr. Chair. It is dilatory, no debate or amendment.
Okay, so we will now, I'm assuming it's probably best to proceed with the recorded division on this, just to make sure we're clear. The motion in front of the committee is that we now adjourn the debate. And Madam Clerk, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Fonseca?
Yay.
Dr. Fry? I'm sorry, Dr. Fry, I did not hear you.
I'm on mute again. I keep interrupting people when I'm off mute, so I keep myself on mute. Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Fry. Ms. Demoff?
Yes.
Ms. Sahota?
Yes.
Mr. Saini?
Yes.
Mr. Soroya?
No.
Mr. Diot?
No.
Ms. Gladue?
No.
Mr. Morantz?
Definitely not.
Monsieur Bergeron?
Considérant que je dois partir, oui.
Given that I have to leave, yes.
Ms. McPherson?
No.
Mr. Chair, the results are 6 yeas and 5 nays.
Thank you very much. The motion carries. Madam Clerk, does that also mean that the meeting is adjourned, or is it simply debate on the motion?
Debate on the motion and the amendment is adjourned.
Okay, colleagues, what I would suggest, clearly there is more authority that's required. That seems to be the will of the committee as expressed tonight in light of the fact that we have time constraints. If we can work collaboratively to put this onto the agenda on Tuesday to resume the discussion, I think that would probably meet as best as possible the collective interest of the members. Is that something members would agree with?
Yes.
And if so, we will place it into the hands of the clerk to figure out if it's best placed in front of the witness panel that's scheduled for Tuesday or immediately afterwards.
Chair, may I just ask a question, please?
Please, go ahead.
Chair, perhaps when we're thinking of expanding or lengthening meetings, there could be like a straw poll taken of everybody to make sure that we don't put people like Mr. Bergeron in a position in which he has to run. And some of us have other meetings that we have. So if we can get an okay that it's okay and that we can expand, then everyone knows how to set their agenda accordingly.
It's an excellent point, Dr. Fry. I think tonight the understanding was that we would go until 6. We're slightly past that. I'm very mindful of other commitments by colleagues, and we will do our utmost to meet people's schedules as we're able. Colleagues, thank you. And with that, we are adjourned until Tuesday. Thank you so much.